Today we're going to be working on multiplying fractions and mixed numbers, and so the first thing that we have to think about is 1/2 times 6. And so 1/2 times 6, what I like to do is I like to think of this multiplying. I like to think of a word that we use to represent the operation multiplying, and when we do that, we get 1/2 of 6. Of is one of those words that tells us to multiply. And when we think about 1/2 of 6, if I have 6 stars down here, and I have 1/2 of them, I know that 1/2 of 6 is 3. And so 1/2 times 6 is also 3. And so today we're going to be working on so the of will kind of help us make sense of our answers and make sure that our answers make sense. Today we're really going to jump in, though, to how do we do this multiplication when our fractions get a little bit more complex or a little bit harder to think through. And so if you open up your foldable, you've got some practice problems. And the first thing says, decide up front if your final answer will be positive or negative. Follow the rules for multiplying positive and negative numbers. So remember, those rules say that if the signs are the same, our answer is positive, and if signs are different, our answer is negative. Keep whatever denominator is already there. You do not need a common denominator. So this is unlike adding and subtracting. Just like the rules are different for positives and negatives with adding and subtracting, it's also different when we multiply. We can keep whatever denominator is there. And it says reduce as you go. So if you can cross reduce, I'm going to show you what that means in a second. We're going to do that. And then we're going to multiply straight across top and bottom and make sure that our final answer is in simplest form. The answer will be smaller than both parts of the numbers that you started with. The answer will be smaller than both numbers you started with. So when we multiply, they're saying specifically when we multiply a fraction by a fraction, we're getting a fraction of a fraction, it will definitely get smaller. So again, think of that multiplication sign as an of. This is talking about answer will be smaller than both numbers than when you started. It's talking about just fraction to fraction. So if you multiply a fraction times a fraction, you are going to get an answer that's smaller than both fractions that you started with, because you're taking a fraction of a fraction, which is going to make it even smaller. So this very first one, our answer is going to be positive. We can keep our denominators. We're going to cross reduce, which means we're going to think about what to, we're going to look across from each other. So the 1 and the 8, 1 and 8, 1 is already as simple as it goes, but 3 and 3 can go, they have a common factor of 3. And so 3 can go into 3 once, and 3 can go into 3 once. And so we can cross reduce them so that our answer is already in simplest form. And then we can just multiply straight across. 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 8 is 8. So I've got 1/8 as my answer here. And again, it's positive. 1/8 is smaller than 1/3 and 3/8, so I know that my answer makes sense, and I can keep going. On example number 2 here, I'm going to cross reduce if I can. So 5 and 15 have a common factor of 5. 5 goes into 5 once, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. And so we can cross reduce them to be 1 and 3. And then 2 and 16 have a common factor of 2. 2 can go into 2 once, and 2 can go into 16 8 times. So we can cross reduce 2 and 16 to be 1 and 8. And then we can multiply straight across on our fraction bars up top. 1 times 3 is on top, over 1 times 8 is 8 on bottom. And so my final answer here is 3/8. On the next problem, I have a negative times a positive, and I know that a negative times a positive is going to give me a negative answer, so I'm going to put the negative sign there just so I don't forget about it. And then I'm going to look to cross reduce. I'm looking at 3 and 4 and thinking about common factors, and I can't think of any. Then I look at 2 and 5, and I can't think of any common factors there. So now I'm just going to multiply straight across. 2 times 4 is 8. 3 times 5 is 15. And I'm going to double check and ask myself if this answer is in simplest form, which it is. And it's also smaller than 2/3 and 4/5, which are the two fractions that I started with. And so it seems reasonable and makes sense that my answer here is -8/15. At this point in time, I challenge you to try this last one on your own by pausing the video and then check your answer. Okay, so on this one, hopefully you tried it by yourself and you realized that you could cross-reduce. 3 goes into 3 once and 3 goes into 9 3 times. If you didn't do that step and you just multiplied straight across, it's okay, it will still work. You would have got 12 over, you would have got 12 over 63, and you would have had to recognize that they had a common factor of 3, and you would have had to reduce top and bottom by dividing both top and bottom by 3 to get your simplified answer. So cross-reducing just helps us get to a simpler answer, and it makes our numbers that we're multiplying and dividing a lot smaller as well. So 4 times 1 is 4, 3 times 7 is 21, a negative times a negative is a positive, and so my final answer here is 4 over 21.